What's up, everyone? So, yesterday I was feeling the familiar sensations that invite me to sit down in front of the camera in this way and to simply share with you guys what I've been exploring and my current teachings that life is giving me. And so, the past few weeks, this theme of what it means to be a warrior has been emerging. And I actually got the download or the inspiration to make a video for this a couple weeks ago, actually. It's in my notes for videos to film, but I didn't feel ready yet. And last night or just yesterday, for whatever reason, it felt ready. It felt like it was time to sit down. And although I don't have as many points that I want to specifically hit on, and I don't necessarily understand or know the direction that this is going to go, I'm just trusting. And I think you guys will see how that seems to be one of the main themes of what it means to be a warrior. You know, I've spoken often over the past few years about the hero's journey. And I didn't realize up until recently that this has been a theme that has presented itself to me more times than not as I really deepen into myself, into God, and as I become more of a vessel, as I open myself more to be a servant of God or of truth. And so you guys will probably notice this as well as I have. Anyone that, pays enough attention can see this, how we often reach certain summits where everything is so clear, and it's like rebirth, where we're seeing for the first time, and just that clarity draws you to a level of transcendence where, you really do feel untouchable. And then you go on your journey and you go through the dark nights of the soul, and you go through the confusion and the doubt and the despair, and before you even know it, you realize you've been making your journey up towards another summit. And where you were standing from before, although it was great because you were seeing and you were perceiving from a level higher than what might have been normal leading up to that point in time, and it felt good, right? Coming closer to truth feels better. It liberates us. You realize that you were only seeing from a certain level, and you continue to do that. It's a continual process of, the next battle. And it's interesting that I've been guided to the Bhagavad Gita again, or at least one of the translations of it that I really enjoy, that does contain some of the scriptures and the texts from the Bhagavad Gita. But really, in a way, allows my Western mind to assimilate, the very deep spiritual teaching that book is. And as this, the phrase warrior or the word warrior continues to be presented to me by life and, internally and externally, not surprised that one of the most spiritual texts on our planet, the setting for it takes place on a battlefield, which is quite just so perfect. When life does these things, it's so perfect. And so first I just want to start off with saying that, there's no... warriors don't look a certain way, or they don't act a certain way. There are some definite maybe characteristics, that might not be the right word, but the way they operate, at least internally, it's safe to say it's very similar. Although warriors could be moms, They could be neighbors, they could be elderly people, they could be people that are, actually freedom fighters. They could be meditators, right? They could be the most peaceful being can be a warrior. It might be helpful to start off with what brought me great clarity around this topic of being a warrior. And I don't really get sucked into shows too much, but when I do, I pay attention to why, or at least there is a strong archetype present in the shows that I'm really attracted to. So over the past few years, it has been things like Vikings, and now I am watching The Last Kingdom. And sometimes I get sucked up in things just because the romance and the lust and the pleasure and just, being a woman, the age that this body is, and, hormones and everything, that, I understand why certain aspects of those draw me in. But eventually I'll fall away from those, or I won't finish it, or I'll get bored of it, or whatever. Sounds about right. But I will notice that when it comes to these other shows that I'm really drawn to, when I really pay attention to it, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm noticing that the archetype is very similar of these shows, and it's the hero's journey. It's the warrior, the path of the warrior. And so currently I'm like, finally falling out of this like weird earthly obsession that I had with the main character in this current show that I'm watching. He's like very physically appealing, very easy on the eyes, and he's got the long hair and the man bun, and just chef's kiss spirit. You did great with that one. And I was, I realized that I can have the same kind of this deep desire to be on someone's team, or this deep desire to, I feel like it's quite natural for us to seek or to be drawn to partners that we feel are our match or our counterpart, or even if we feel like they're out of our league. It's interesting to take note that oftentimes we are drawn to individuals that in some way represent to us, like there's a mirroring happening where we recognize qualities within that individual that we either recognize within ourselves or that we would like to experience more of, right? And so there's that deep attraction, and I feel like that's very natural. And we can actually learn a lot about the type of people we're attracted to because of that mirroring effect, right? And so I just noticed that this individual, this being, or this character, right? Because I don't know anything about this real dude, this actor, but this character that is in this show is one that I was deeply attracted to, right? And that's finally weaning. I think the obsessive part got out of the way. But, I have him on my background and everything. It's like, oof, it's next level. So I'm thinking to myself, what is it about these shows that keep me coming back and that have me so enamored by these characters? These roles that they're playing in. Even when I was, teaching fitness, I would teach my in-person classes to these groups. And when I was watching Vikings at the time, I remember I even taught class differently. Like the way I walked, the way I carried myself was different because it was activating. Archetypes are things that they represent. It's almost like how deities in certain cultures represent different aspects of God. And so that's kind of, I feel like, what an archetype is too, or in a weird way, it is kind of similar in the sense that it activates certain chords within you. And sometimes certain archetypes are more or less active most of our lives. And sometimes we have periods too where one chord becomes very active. And so this warrior chord has been very active for me the past few years. And again, it's not until I've reached this other summit that I realize why. And it couldn't come at a more timely time on the planet, honestly. And so that's why I'm sure I'm guided to be making this video right now, even though I have no idea where the fuck it's going or where it's headed. But we're in it together. 11/11. Must be doing something right. So this character and what these other characters have represented in the past. What I love about this current show, and I think I'll just get into more storytelling for this transmission, because there's a lot of stories that I think could do a much better job at communicating the point of this transmission versus me just continuing to ramble about how hot this actor is. So the story starts where a young boy is essentially starts off born as a Saxon, and through battles ends up becoming a slave for the Danes. And, you know, eventually, through the innocence of a child, you can already see the nature of a warrior emerging, where the titles don't matter, and he ends up saving this Dane. Ragnar is his name, saving his daughter from, you know, being raped. I don't know if I can say that on the internet these days, but so Ragnar ends up eventually adopting him as his own son. So born a Saxon, raised a Dane is kind of like the phrase that's used throughout this show. And that's where you can already see the qualities of a warrior emerging, where it didn't matter that Ragnar had killed his father in a battle. It didn't matter that he was technically a slave, whatever. The labels that were put on him did not entice him. They did not entice him to act in a certain way. And so as the story goes on, life brings him to a point to where he eventually, you know, his family ends up dying, the Danes. And so he's essentially left in a position where he has to serve the king, and essentially serve him. And he's put in these positions where it seems like he kind of has no choice, and he just has to follow the course of where life is leading him. And I'm sure throughout my narration, you guys will, you know, kind of understand where I'm coming from with this, and you'll be able to hopefully see how this applies to your own life. You'll be able to see yourself in this character. And so he has people on one side, you know, the Danes and his old lovers, and, you know, people asking why he's become a traitor. And, you know, it's just where life has brought him. This is what he must do for himself, and, you know, to gain a name, or, you know, he has this vision, and he kind of has to play the part in order to actualize this vision. And is essentially left in a position where he's kind of going back and forth between being a Dane and being a Saxon, and kind of playing for both teams, but ultimately just playing for himself and what feels right to him. Because what you notice throughout this storyline as it unfolds, no matter how angry people become with him, no matter how angry either side gets because they can't put him under their thumb, they can't trust him to show up in any way that they will be able to assume in advance accurately. And it's interesting to see these people that, you know, at some point have so much hatred towards him, or maybe not so much hatred as just frustration, because, you know, their minds are like, you should be fighting for us, you should be on our team. But ultimately, to see this individual, this warrior, just answers to himself. They just answer to themselves. what warriors do. And ultimately, it's not themselves as in their small self, because a warrior is not kept by comfort, right? They're out there, they're on the battlefield. They're putting their entire lives, they're putting everything on the line to serve their ultimate vision and what they feel will bring them liberation and will bring them to God. So it's interesting that both sides of this have their ideas, their own ideas of the gods, or, God, the one God, right? And in their own way, they're all serving it, but it's very dogmatic, and you can feel the rigidity behind their service. And you can even see in some senses that certain characters hide behind their dogma, and they hide behind their religion, right? You see some of these people that are very religious and Saxons, whatever. You see that they still hide behind that they're still greedy, that they're still lustful, that they are still hungry for power and will do anything to get it, right? And so there's this continual, this underlying theme that you notice within the hero's journey of, people being at war with themselves. And when there's not a necessary balance of instincts and trusting yourself and not separating yourself from God and waiting to hear the answer, or waiting to understand, or opening your book and seeing, what does God say about this, right? There has to be a balance or it becomes rigid. And so while this individual pisses a lot of people off, it's like at the end of the day, you see how he has done nothing but gain the utmost respect from everyone around him, no matter what team they're on, because they can't fully trust him to meet their agenda. They cannot fully trust him to meet their ideas of who he should be. But they do know that when he says he will do something, that he does it. He keeps his word. And they do know that above all else, that he will stay true to himself. And then that's where we gain respect for people, is not because they're doing things. This is how I gain respect for myself or anyone, is they're not doing things because it makes them look good. Maybe some things they do happens to make them look good for a certain amount of time, sure. But they don't withhold what they feel is right. They don't withhold their truth just so they can accommodate other people's ignorance or other people's, when I say ignorance in this sense, I'm not saying that other people's ideas are wrong, but they don't withhold their truth because, essentially what ignorance is thinking that your worldview is the way everyone should see it. And that if they don't see it the way you do, that they're stupid or they are a lower level type of individual. That's ignorance. And so you see throughout all this entire storyline that this guy is just given so many hands, like he has so many victories, right? And then it's like, it's just one thing after another. And life is continuing to test him, is what it seems like. I don't like using the word test because it almost feels like you could fail or you could pass, right? But ultimately, a warrior has no choice. A warrior will always get back up. And a warrior never sees defeat, never takes defeat as being the ultimate, the end-all, be-all. And so I realized when I really investigated why I was so enamored with this individual is because I recognized myself within that character, as I'm sure most of you guys drawn to this video can as well. Oftentimes we're born into families and we find ourselves in situations where we're in communities, or we're in situations where people are asking us to choose a side. And we can see all sides. Or we can at least see many sides to where we understand we don't have to take just one. Right? Ignorance, too, I feel like is assuming there's only one or two, you only see one or two options as being right or as being true. And, a warrior understands that there's many, many paths. It's not just one or two, it's 5 or 6 sometimes. And as the storyline continues, you just see people, you just see someone that's really living from their heart, and that is not in it to just win it for themselves, but in it to uplift everyone so everyone can win. You see how that slowly chips away at the rigidity of those around him. You just become more and more okay. The warrior becomes more and more okay with not knowing, and with not needing to know what steps lie 50 paces ahead. Understanding there might be an ultimate vision or an ultimate goal for this phase or this chapter, and then being malleable along the way. I'm learning too that a warrior is not defensive about their views. And if there's a level of defense involved, it's because you don't fully trust. You don't fully trust. Like in this sense, what I'm seeing right now, just so you guys can kind of see through my eyes in this moment in time, is how, if you take the fact of religion or something, when people so want to communicate that their God is the God, or the way that they interpret the universe is the way. It's the right way. It's the only way. There's almost a level of fear behind people that are trying to convince you that their way is right. Because if you really peel back enough layers, you see how it's because they don't really know. They're not really sure. But if the vast majority of people around them are convinced of the same thing, then they don't really have to question what they're investing in. They don't really have to question themselves if everyone else is kind of on board with it. Right? But it's only when you are presented with an individual that seems to be opposing your viewpoints and has a true level of confidence, right? That unwavering sense where they're not trying to convince you of anything. It's part of the dance we all share as brothers and sisters walking each other home, is shaking up each other's paradigms, loosening up people's rigid belief systems and dogmatic ways. It's not something you have to think about either. A warrior doesn't think about doing these things. It just does. It just happens naturally. And the thing about modern day warriors, right, and people those beings that are drawn to this video, we are being asked to engage in a type of battle that has many, many, many layers to it, like all battles do. So I'll give you an example of something I'm currently extracting a lot of nutrients from in my own life. So, as some of you know, I recently experienced the loss of my baby brother. He would have been 26 in December, and it's been just over a month now. The thing about that is when my father died, so my father adopted me when I was 2, he adopted my older brother when he would have been 5 then. My brother that just passed, my younger brother, he's my half-brother, so my mom remarried. My older brother and I have a different biological father that I didn't meet. I don't remember him when I was younger, but re-meeting until I was 18. And so my stepdad, or my dad, is what he's always been to me, passed away 6 years ago. His side of the family became extremely greedy. And I'm doing my best to lay the details out without infusing my own perception of it. But if I'm just being honest with what's happening, the second, we started, just from the time he died, it was about the things, it was about his guns, it was about his truck. It was always seemed to be very materialistic about what they were going to get out of it, right? Which kind of led certain members of my family on my mom's side to just be a little bit cautious. And I'm glad that they trusted their intuition, because sometimes I can be too naive. I learn I can be too naive and trusting of people. But maybe that's not necessarily, a weakness. So essentially what happened is they took my brother from me and the rest of our family. And my younger brother is autistic. He had was developing normally until he had a vaccine. And he started essentially going backwards to the point where the doctor said he would never walk or talk. But my mom, being the warrior she was, would not accept that fate for her child, and, did a lot of therapy with him. I just remember going to therapy with him and just, how hard my family worked. My mom worked so hard for him to be where he was. And so he was easily manipulated, which is something that my stepdad's side of the family took great advantage of. And so I hadn't seen my brother in maybe over 5 years. And they were of the religious type, very dogmatic though. Religious but not spiritual is what I would call them. And so we've been in court with them, or we just got out of it. We had been in court with them for 6 years. Because they thought Giovanni and I, my dad's survivors, didn't deserve any of the money because we weren't actually his kids. They never really liked my mom because she had been married before. And my brother believes part of that is also because she's African American as well as white. She's half black, half white. So, he just tends to see more of that, I think, than I do, than I will be able to acknowledge and investigate. But when someone points it out, I'm like, oh yeah, that kind of does make sense. So, essentially, they didn't let Connor talk to any of us. They didn't let my brother talk to any of us. And so, of course, that creates a certain level of contempt for people and just the disgust. My levels of disgust. It got to the point I couldn't even talk about it. And a lot of people didn't even know what was going on in my life. People close to me didn't even really know what was happening about the courts and about my brother, because I couldn't talk about it without being completely enraged that they thought that somehow they had convinced themselves that what they were doing was okay, was justifiable. And that they said it was about him and what they wanted, but they also knew my dad, passing had a lot of money, and that Connor would get a lot of that. And this is building up. This is just the beginning, you guys, of what I'm currently learning, and just, this story time style video. So they, for a little bit, there were certain people that Connor was allowed to talk to, and then when we would ask questions about how they're treating him and what they're saying, everything, eventually we thought people were maybe listening to the conversations he was having with us, with family. So none of us, the past few years, none of us have really spoken to him. And again, my dad and my brother lived in Alaska at the time, and his family lives in Snohomish, Washington. So, yeah, they were just nasty to us, saying that we weren't really his kids, and his sister wanted control over the estate for her own motives, because they didn't want us to have any of the money, any of my dad's leftover estate or anything. They wanted it all for themselves. And two, it's interesting, my younger brother had nothing negative to say about my mom. To the day she died, my dad and her remained best friends. They never fully divorced because, my mom wasn't working and she was pretty disabled in her own way. And he kept her on, they stayed married so she could receive insurance benefits. He was a really good guy. And, I love Connor so much. Always have. Anyone who grew up with me just knew that dynamic and that protective kind of sense I always had for him. And yeah, you just meet these beings that just completely shatter your framework of how to act, or they're just so they're not fully here. A large portion of their spirit is with God, and so it's always a gift being able to interact with beings like that. So finally, the estate stuff is wrapping up. I know this is a longer story, but whatever. The estate stuff, after 6 years battling in court with these people, finally wraps up. And what my dad had in savings was to be split between 3. And there was to be a check written to my dad's sister. So Connor's aunt, I do not call her an aunt. She's not family to me anymore. So the check was to be written in her name for whatever reason, and not Connor's. And essentially, this is important. They had taken guardianship over him. They had signed legal paperwork, so they were technically Connor's guardian. So this is kind of how they were able to enforce this disgusting sense of power and manipulation and brainwashing over in his life, to the point where, I didn't finish that train of thought, but he never had anything negative to say about his mom until he started living with them. And my heart goes out to the fact that his memories were tainted because of their own selfish motives. And of course, all memories of me and my brother were probably also tainted as well. To the point that if I ever did see him again, I didn't think it would be till years down the line, and I didn't even know if he'd want to see me or if he'd be nice to me. So the day that the check was to go out to them, the check actually was going to go out on a Friday. And it was put on hold. Everyone knew, right? Everyone's lawyers were talking to each other. So everyone knew this money was being distributed finally. And the check was going to be going out on a Friday. I believe it was the 15th. No, the 16th? It doesn't matter. But it was a Friday in October, mid-October. And the same day that the money was going to go through, my brother died. And we're still not sure how it happened, because we were told that it was from a seizure, that he suffocated in his sleep or something, maybe. But the medical examiner said there's no sign that is the cause of death. And so this is when it's important. This is, again, when I'm sure you guys can already feel, my family on my mom's side is entirely suspicious. Entirely. Even my grandma, who does so well at, she's a woman of power, great power. She's made great change on this planet, been in politics, had lunch with the presidents of the United States. She is very, she doesn't let her emotions get the best of her. And she has a good way of keeping herself gracious. And so when I see these beings that I generally know to be very poised and not to jump to irrational conclusions, when I see even them saying certain things and having weird intuitions, you pay attention. And so now we're dealing with, on one hand, this had been a permission slip over the years to see through their eyes and to understand that, these are beings of great suffering. I remember being in meditation one day, and asking to see them differently, because I hated them. I hated these people. You know, my dad's mom, so the grandma and the aunt and the uncle and the cousins, I hated them. But I knew that my hatred to them bound me to them. And I didn't want them to win. I didn't want any type of satisfaction, even though I'm never going to talk to them again. I didn't want any possibility of a satisfaction that they were eating away my peace. Because that's when you really lose, is when someone has the ability to eat away at your peace and your contentment and your happiness. And so in my meditation, I was shown this vision. I was going deep, deep, deep into my own heart. And then it like zoomed into my heart. And then when it zoomed out, I was looking into the eyes of the aunt, my dad's sister, the one who's kind of been like the ringleader of all of this debauchery. And essentially trying to bully us into, giving up everything to them for whatever reason. And so I got it. The core of them is the same as the core in me. And so you start to see all the layers to it, right? You see the layers of understanding karma and understanding that, these beings they're ran by demons. To be so full of hate and illusion that you can convince yourself that, instilling hate into the heart of an innocent and someone who doesn't know any better is the right thing to do in order to fulfill your own agenda. I can't imagine how the rest of their lives must be. It must be fucking miserable. If you're so concerned about money, you have sold your soul. You're so concerned about being right. You're so concerned about not wanting someone else to win, or not wanting someone else to benefit or to live a good life, because you've convinced yourself that somehow them benefiting takes away from you being able to benefit, because you put so much of your faith in things on this ephemeral plane of existence. So on one hand, you have the ability to see the fallacy, and I could understand how much suffering they have in their hearts and how much hatred they have in their hearts. And again, I almost pitied them. I had a certain amount of pity, because I know that's no matter if they have short moments of seeming victory, if the victory is ever at the expense of someone else, if it's at the cost of someone else, and someone else suffers because of your victory, are you truly victorious? And true victory is being self-sourced and understanding what true prosperity is. And so I could kind of see, I feel into their paradigms, right? I can feel that on one level, but as Arjuna was reminded by Krishna time and time again, it's like one of the forms of yoga that is exercised, or that is touched upon in the Bhagavad Gita, is karma yoga, when your action takes you closer to God. And being an active participant in these things. So for a while I tried to bury my head away from this, and I kind of let my older brother take care of it, and I didn't ever want to talk about it because of how it made me feel, and the anger and the anxiety I would get from thinking about the lawyers, and just the hurt and the betrayal. So I didn't want to deal with it. And so now, and then dealing with communicating these things, communicating the fact that you want to forgive people, to, certain members of family that are just so angry, and they're, that seem justified in their anger as well, and their want for revenge. And even me, I've been on that, and I've swayed in and out of those emotions this past month, especially the want for justice. So on one level, my very human self wanting them to get theirs, right? But then again, understanding, I don't know their karma. I don't know what their soul came to learn. I don't know what the contract was with, the sister and my dad and, Connor, and how his involvement is and what their souls all wanted to learn, right? This is where it becomes very, very layered. The warrior's path is you understand the multiplicity of things. And it's not black and white. It's an infinite shade of gray. And so now that we're dealing with the possibility that, they did something to him, and that, and I knew this was going to happen, but I just heard this news yesterday talking to my grandmother. Miraculously, there has been a will that was found that my brother supposedly wrote that if anything happened to him, the money would go to his cousins. So my aunt's children. And I feel like anyone with eyes could see how fucking suspicious that is. Right? Because he was also, whether or not he did it, if they just said, hey, will you sign your name on this piece of paper? He would have done it, not knowing what the fuck he was doing. Right? And of course it would be suspicious if he said it goes to my aunt. So let's just make it for the kids, right? So you see all the layers that I'm dealing with, that we deal with, right? This is just my fucking melodrama, my human drama. Take this how it applies to you. Because on one level, I don't care. On one level, I don't fucking care. And the longer that I have to deal with them, the longer that I feel they're getting my energy and they don't deserve it. The more that I focus on them and I marinate and I ruminate on it. And I realize we're not doing my brother a service at all. Not to mention the obituary they wrote about him. That my grandma told me both of my uncles were like tearing up. They couldn't read it. They couldn't even finish it. And the day that I read it, that my brother sent it to me because I didn't know about it, the day that I read it, I was crying all day. Because they made it seem like they saved him. They saved him from us. And so on one level, I can see from them, maybe they really have convinced themselves, and they truly, I'm sure, believe that they saved him, and they converted him to their religion, which is, just an excuse to be hateful and abusive and controlling and greedy. It's interesting how many parallels were to this show that I'm watching to what I'm actually experiencing, right? And so you have some people that say they saved him, right? They say, we saved him. And you have us, the other people, they're like, no, you fucking took him. You brainwashed him. And you have some people on this side thinking they're doing the right thing and probably feel very justified that they're doing the right thing and that they deserve, the fruits of it. You have other people over here, we're doing the right thing, and no matter what side it is, it's like you see just like the fucking insanity of it. The more you meet truth, the more you just see the fucking insanity of humanity, man. And on one level, I want nothing to do with it. And this is just a microcosm. I see how this applies to the world at large and what we're seeing. Injustice. Right? We didn't even celebrate Thanksgiving. I don't even want to call it that because, the amount of, just the cover up, the genocide, right? And then whoever has the pen and the paper can kind of write it to be what they want it to be. Whoever seems to have the most power can kind of convert the storyline, the narrative, into a way that benefits them. We've seen that time and time again. And so it's interesting that I felt so deeply for the Native Americans. We had a really low-key day, and we were playing music, chanting, Native American chanting, and I've always felt very drawn to that culture, very resonant with that culture, their beliefs, their ways of living. And so I just started doing a little bit more research because I already knew that the story I was told in school, in public school, I was told was false, was completely fucking false. And how do I know it's false? Not just because I heard it from someone, it's that there are survivors from the tribes, right, that were involved in it and that had ancestors involved in what happened when the European settlers came over, right, over the course of those hundreds of years, and spoke their truth and what really happened. The genocide, the rape, the unpeaceful way that the Europeans just kind of did what they wanted to. And even to the point where just like the ritual of Thanksgiving seemed to be infused with this mockery of, I was watching this. I was really drawn to the headdress of the Native Americans and just like the big feathers sticking out. I saw this one guy made a video about it and said how, if you think about what a turkey looks like when it's alive, a turkey looks very similar to the headdress of a Native American, like would be sitting on the head, right? And so there's a turkey that looks like a Native American, and you kill it. And then, what are the three main ingredients of the three main dishes that people have? The turkey, the stuffing, which represents their guts, the guts of the Native American, and the cranberry sauce, which would represent blood, right? And as someone who's very into like, wouldn't say I'm like super into the occult or anything, but I'm, I believe in rituals and ceremonies. And so as someone that feels very natural to, I believe it. I could believe how there's like been this mockery that people are unknowingly engaging in, right? So I wanted nothing to fucking do with it. And I felt this deep sadness, right? And then it's funny, it's so ironic because the day before I had made a video about not taking yourself seriously, not taking life so seriously, right? And so that's you really do see that to be a warrior, you have to live in all of these levels, right? You can't bury your head. You can't run away from it. You can't meditate it away. Because you understand if it's in front of you, it's relevant for you. If it's occurring in your life, it's part of your lesson. It's part of your battle. It's part of your fight. And so I felt this deep sadness on the day of the Native Americans. And they call it the day of mourning, where most people call it Thanksgiving. They call it the day of mourning. And my family and I will call it the day of remembrance from here on out. And so I saw in that moment, I saw the paradox of none of this is real. None of this is real. None of this matters. It's going to be over in a blip. Like, our individual incarnations aren't even going to show up on the radar of eternity just because of how short it all is. How fucking irrelevant and meaningless it all is. So on one level, I feel that. I get that. And I don't want to, I want to travel light. I have that tattooed on my fucking ankle. Travel light, right? Don't carry more than you need to. But at the same time, I cannot deny that when I know that that people suffer, you can't help but feel it. A certain part of you cannot help but partake in that suffering. And so there's that multiplicity of what it means to be a warrior. You understand that none of it means anything, and at the same time it means everything. And you understand as long as there is suffering on this planet, we all suffer. And so it's this weird sensation you start to get where it's like it's so incredibly gruesome and so dark to be on this planet, and at the same time it is so beautiful. And it's awe-inspiring, and it's blissful, and it's happy, and it's disgusting, and it's outrageous. It's all of it. And so you learn to be okay. It's like there's a certain lightness that you get with not trying to bury your head and pretend like this shit's not happening, and that there's not deep corruption happening on our planet in the hearts and minds of your family, your friends. And the biggest battle is what the Bhagavad Gita says. The only battle worthwhile is a battle that we're all undertaking These are my own words. And it's the battle for self-mastery. It's the internal battle. Because as within, so without. And so we see that we're alive on a planet in a time where, with all the war and the deceit and the disgusting attempts at control, it can enrage you. I think it was Maya Angelou that said, of course you are angry. It would be hard to not be angry at a time like this. But it's essential that you utilize your anger in a way that does not destroy you. And so that's the path of the warrior, is that you reach these summits and you see what it could be. And you meet incredible people along the journey, family, true family, that you can dance with and share this, the beauty of it all, revel in all of it, the insanity of it, and laugh at the insanity of it. And then, and you just take it as it comes. You're both reveled in awe, and you're both disgusted, right? And there comes a certain level of freedom even within that, because now you're no longer pushing against things that are hard to look at. You're no longer lying to yourself about what's actually happening, right? Like I did with that example of my family. Like, I was lying to myself. I didn't want to believe it because I was still hanging on to this idea of what truth looked like. And I understand that truth invites you to see things for what they are, and finding the freedom in that. Because then truth also reminds you that this is just one dimension, one of the many, many different dimensions and experiences, and this planet and this Earth school is just one. It's just one trip, right? Who knows what the next trip's going to look like? Who knows what time period on Earth it's going to be, if it's even going to be on Earth, but it's just one trip, right? And so Gandhi has a quote, another Gandhi quote about, I forget how it goes exactly, but he essentially, the heart of the quote is to stand behind what you stand for with all of your heart. But knowing ultimately what you do will be insignificant, but you must do it. I'm pretty sure that's a quote. What you do will be insignificant, but you must do it. Right? I feel like that sums up. I know he really was a student of the Gita. And that's essentially what Krishna continues to reiterate to Arjuna. This warrior that he doesn't want the battle. What's the point of the fucking battle? He doesn't get it. How is this bringing me closer to God? Right? It's a paradox, though. The higher in truth you get, the more paradoxical it becomes, the more inclusive it becomes. So it's not this or that, but it's this and that. It's everything. And so, the warrior becomes more and more okay with the this and the that of the nature of understanding the roles that other people are playing, and oftentimes forgetting that they're playing. You forget, or you see how more and more people are so convinced that the character, this temporary character they've taken on, is who they actually are. And so you learn how to navigate that. You learn how to exist within a world where people are forgetting that it's all a play. And you understand that it becomes more of a fun play when you meet more people that know that it's all for fun and that it's all a play, right? And so then there's, again, it's the human heart and it's the higher heart that suffers and that can't stand for injustice, but then understands at some point in this vast eternity that we will play all the parts, that we have played all the parts. And so the person that seems so disgusting to you, you have been that person. So the warrior understands these things. You have played all the parts, even within a single incarnation. I have been a really shitty person. If I'm just gonna be completely honest, and that's one of the reasons why I'm like, don't follow me. don't follow me. You walk alongside me, right? Because I've fucked up. I've played many different characters too. But I also can have compassion for that version of myself because I understand firsthand how we act when we are ignorant and when we are suffering and when we don't know that we are suffering and we don't know what to do with our suffering. I understand that oftentimes the people around us will suffer greatly because of it until we get the proper tools, right? But then understanding too that is grace within itself, and those tools come only when you're ready for them. And that's oftentimes probably after several thousands of incarnational experiences. Maybe not, who knows? Again, the warrior is okay with not knowing. We know that we don't really know. But a deeper part of us kind of knows, you know? And it's only when we're like, oh, I don't really know, I don't fully know, that we even get to taste that deeper knowingness that the knower gives to us. And so it's about remaining open, not taking sides, right? Again, when all of this first happened and Connor first died, it was like, oh, man, I did not want to talk to my brother, my older brother. Even still, it's hard for me to want to talk to him just because he has so much anger that I know stems from something much deeper, right? And until we get to the root of it, we will just externalize this anger. We continue to externalize our feelings and sensations onto things outside of ourselves that seem to be outside of ourselves. But the warrior remains open and doesn't take sides. And I was even surprised to see myself kind of sticking up for these people that, you know, have been just fucking, you know, all suspicions aside of the fact that what happened to my brother, now that there's like, you know, a will that has come up out of nowhere that says, you know, because essentially what happens is that the money would be then Connor's money. G and I are the next of kin, so it would go to us. But now supposedly there's a will that says otherwise, right? So apart from all the things that kind of, all the fucking red flags in my face, you know, I was even at a point where I'm able to see where they're coming from. I'm able to see them. And trying to walk someone through that who thinks that you should be on their team. And you seem to be sticking up for the enemy. I feel like that's when you kind of see that you're operating in realms much different from many people. In some cases it's easier, and in some senses it becomes more complicated, because then then you get to a point to where you're avoiding the desire to try to over-explain yourself and over-explain who you are. And so it's one thing I'm learning in my warrior training that life has put me through currently, is that this is said in the Tao Te Ching, you know, the one who knows doesn't speak, right? And those who speak don't know, right? And so you learn when you're supposed to give someone a negative truth and how that truth is, you know, supposed to be given to them, and, you know, no more, no less. I feel like it's natural for us to want to have people understand us. Understand where we're coming from. Understand, no, I'm good. I promise you, I'm good. I mean the best. I want the best for us all. So to be a warrior is no easy feat. And some would say that if you identify as being a warrior, then a war is what you will get. But that's not something that I identified as until I realized that's just what it was. That's just what's happening. There's a great battle occurring in the hearts and minds of everyone. And we see that battle externalized every single day in how we treat one another, and our responses and reactions to each other, even to ourselves. That's where it all starts. Because how we treat another is ultimately, there's no separation. So when we hate someone else, that hatred comes back to us. We hate ourselves. When we hate ourselves, we hate other people. There's no separation. It's all the same. And so there's, again, the warrior just treads lightly, and knows that everything they do will be insignificant, but at the end of the day, they know they must do it. They know they must stay true to that still small whisper within that guides them in a certain way. But the more you walk your path, know that, you will begin to carry yourself, or you do begin to carry yourself in a way that you just command respect. And it's not in a sense that coming from separation or from ego. It's because there's a sense to you that you don't take orders from mankind. You take orders from truth and from source. And you give yourself the permission to figure out what that means to you, to figure out how that means to you and how that presents itself to you, and when it's just your ego disguised as higher wisdom, and when it's not, and at the end of the day it doesn't fucking matter. So you're not afraid to act. You're not afraid to speak your truth. You're not afraid to show up. Because there's nothing you can do that's wrong, right? But the greatest sin there is to go against themselves. That's the root of sin. That's the true definition of sin, is to go against the self. Right? You don't answer to anyone on this plane. And you do what you can. The warrior shows up for the fight that is worth it. Because otherwise you're selling your soul. Otherwise you've given into the idea that you could receive any glimpse of satisfaction from selling your soul in order to appease other people and their expectations of you, and you fulfilling their agenda. Fuck that. There's nothing you can give to me, anyone can give to me, that wouldn't be met by God 1,000 times over, 1,000,000 times over. And so you can rest in that. You begin to rest more in that conviction. And so there's more power. You have more Shakti. There's more assertiveness behind what you say. It's not that you're trying, it's just how it happens. It naturally occurs that way. You begin to be someone that other people can trust because they understand that, you don't have an alternative agenda or ulterior motives. You're in the process of purifying that. And so as much as they understand, they can feel that you're doing your best to relieve yourself of those selfish motives. And so they trust you. Because they know that intuitively, they know that there's nothing they can give to you that you don't already have, that you haven't already found. So there's nothing this world can do to you that it can take from you. But there's something that is to be said about when you're living, no matter how brutal the path may feel, or how uncomfortable it might get, or it might seem through the eyes of others, when you're really living in truth, man. When you're really just blazing your trail and doing your best to show up, it's like the force that comes with that. It has everything it needs. Everything you need comes with it. Living in alignment with that as much as you can. And knowing that ultimately there's no consequences. Right? There's no consequences. And the more that you stand in your fire, and the more that you let that inner fire guide you, the more you will light the fire of those around you. And so you are activating more warriors. You become an activator. And you're reminding them of what they can do. And so the more beings that we have doing that, the harder it is to control. The harder it is for agendas to be pushed onto you. And again, just remembering none of it matters. None of it matters at the end of the day, but it all matters. And as long as you're here, you still have a mission. And no one else can tell you what that is. That's the beauty. Who can say that you're messing up? Who can really say that you're fucking up, right? Or that you need to apologize about something. For what? To who? If it feels right, sure. But don't do it because someone expects it from you. So that feels complete. This feels like a good place to leave off. To be a warrior. I feel like that is, if I were to have any type of label put on to me, that would be a label that I would feel very honored to receive. Because to me that means so much, you know. Being a warrior of truth means everything. It's all I know anymore. Knowing that it's going to take you down so many winding paths, and that's where the fun of it comes in, right? It's where the excitement and the adrenaline comes in, is the good fight. It's a good kind of fight when you're fighting for just truth, and all the different ways that's going to show up in your microcosm of a universe, and how you see that everything that happens in your microcosm is just that. And just a fractal of what's happening in the macrocosm of things. And it is what it is. It is what it is. All right, my friends. If this video brought anything to you, please give it a thumbs up. It helps. It just helps expand the channel, and letting these transmissions reach the people that will be deeply affected by them. Yeah, and if anything came up for you, I'd love to hear it. I love connecting with you guys in the comment section. Yeah, I'll see you guys soon.